Hello, I'm Alwyn. So I think we should better start on time because this is also a CPD course, or not course, a lecture, a seminar. So I'm Alwyn and I'm from Hong Kong here. I'm a lecturer here, teaching mainly land law, and also the PCLLTA. So I'm invited Adrian to give this seminar on this rather trendy topic. And in case you don't know Adrian, he is a barrister and one of the leading experts in land law.
Not quite. Not quite.
I'm not being generous. It's very fair, apt description of Adrian. So, he, I think his passion and enthusiasm for all topics in land law is it's very clear if you've been to his lectures before. And I guess like some of you here may be Hong Kong graduates, so you may remember Professor Wilkinson, especially when you're coming here back for like a conveyancing and land law related seminar. So back then, when Professor Wilkinson unfortunately passed away in around 2019, in early 2019, after he went to hospital, I was tasked to take over one of his courses in only 1 week notice. So unfortunately, it was a very sad situation, but then somebody started to take up the course. So in that moment, when I had to deal with this land-free course, which there was leases, DMCs, resumption, planning, building, termination, priority. There's so many topics, and I wasn't really like up to speed with everything in my practice, especially for planning, building, and some of the other topics. So I asked Adrian to help because he's amongst the people I know. He's probably the only person who has all of those topics at his fingertips. Okay, he's very passionate about land law. He knows everything about land law. So so despite his very busy schedule, he was okay with helping me out, and now even today he's still helping out with the course when his diary permits. Okay, so without further delay, I'll hand it over to Adrian.
Right. Good afternoon, and I feel blessed about Alwyn's praise because I have taught in Hong Kong U for a number of years by having very big shoes to fill since I was being called the so-called replacement, Michael Wilson. Actually, I had to follow his footsteps as to how this course and also the contents of conveyancing method is to be handled and taught in this university. So without further ado, I go into today's topic on the forfeiture for shortfall claims, which I think this topic is sort of related to one topics that I have covered and in one of the undergraduate studies about remedy and the aftermath as to how vendor and purchasers and their obligations would be after termination of contracts. So this is not a particularly happy topic to be taught because after all, we are now facing this market downturn and everybody, including both vendors, particularly developers, and also purchasers, face this great hardship as to what would happen if a purchaser cannot afford to complete the sale in a conveyancing transaction. And of course, there has been recent news coverage as to how things would work because there's this one or number of developers now praying in aid of a certain clause that has been inserted into formal sale and purchase agreements, which you can see from the PowerPoint slide that we call it the mirror clause, which actually gives right to developer to not only forfeit the deposit as paid, but also sue for the shortfall. So that I think has created some shock and surprise to a number of purchasers out there, perhaps because everybody has been in this rising market for over 30 years. So we forgot really about, okay, this mechanism, how and the available remedies that is available to innocent party. So that's why it came as a shock to many. And actually, I think in the media and also there has been a certain discussion in the press as to how this shortfall claim would work. Okay, so for all these easy guide, you perhaps can find from the link that I have included at I think it's page or slide number 7 that I have thought to include in this PowerPoint slide. But for today's purpose, since a lot of you are practitioners, I would try to come to a more legalistic analysis as to how this works out for both the vendor and purchaser. All right, so from the vendor perspective, there would be these and that concerns on project sales, basically, as to what would happen after the default of the purchaser. Okay, apart from the deposit, what the vendor should do, in particular, in light of the CAP 621 regulation that we all know for the residential first-hand sales ordinance, there are further regulations and mechanisms governing as to how resale is conducted. So that is for the vendor side, and for the purchaser side, are there really merits for one to argue against the so-called forfeiture and shortfall claims? All right. So with this introduction in mind, I would proceed with the slide, and I would actually divide this seminar in two parts. The first part being that we will deal with the deposit first, as to what is the deposit, and also what would be the particular scenarios that the vendor would face. Okay, we'll go through that quickly because that is more or less well established for deposit. And then the later part of this seminar, the main dish, will be on the shortfall claims. What if the so-called actual losses, damages, or the damage being suffered by the vendor exceeds the amount of deposit? Then that would be worth investigation. Okay, so as I said, this topic actually is quite hot, and also it should be examinable in the undergraduate course. So perhaps these slides may be included as one of the course contents, because as I see from some of you sitting out there are landlord tutors. So perhaps as you see fit, you can also include the contents, examinable materials. Okay, so it's closely related to what we are actually teaching. Okay, but also for those of you who are more experienced in conveyancing, probably know that actually the clause, especially for the Woomera clause, is incorporated as one of the mandatory clauses by the Lands Department for consent scheme. So for consent scheme, it involves pre-sale consent by the Lands Department, which the Lands Department would prescribe over the terms of the S&P. Okay, and also I think one of the provisions under the CAP 621 may or may not incorporate things clauses of this sort. Okay, because of CAP 621, I believe that for preliminary sale and purchase agreements, it uses the 5% deposit. But for the formal sale and purchase agreement, it is by and large at liberty of the parties. But the parties usually do incorporate the Woomera clause because of the nature of the pre-sale. Okay, so perhaps some of you have read from the press that this topic is actually being branded as forfeiture and claiming the shortfall. So in Chinese, it's called 殺訂追差價, okay, or 殺訂追差價. So that conveniently divides up this seminar into two different parts. The first part being the deposit, and also the second part being further remedies that may be available. They're usually representing the shortfall and also the other expenses that has been incurred on the part of the vendor. Okay, so again, this is not a very happy topic because we are now dealing with the falling markets. People have all these reasons why they opt not to complete the sale. Firstly, they cannot afford it. Secondly, about the mortgageability. Because in the falling markets, the bank or financial institution may not offer a very attractive valuation. And as a result, purchasers may have to top up their down payment. And those of them who cannot afford this down payment would have to forego the deposit. Okay. And thirdly, I think in the past few years for pre-sale development, purchasers are mostly people acting in person. Sorry, not acting through a body corporate. All right. So for that reason, for these past years, the reason is that due to the imposition of the BSD and also the SSD, okay, which imposes a further levy on stamp duty when one uses a limited company to purchase property. So in those years, people often use their own personal names and purchase the property. And that is why this becomes a concern, because after all, the remedies and also the so-called liquidated damage report against the purchaser will become personally liable. Okay. So it's only that after sometime in 2024 that the CE has abolished the imposition of the SSD and also BSD, that people can actually opt to use body corporates to act as purchasers again. So that actually may ease things a little bit, but those purchasers who have committed for the sale a few years ago would be exposed to this kind of liability. Hence, there was this rather heated debate and discussion in the market. So I also cite these statistics from Hong Kong 01 in 2003 and 2024. So one can see that actually it is actually quite a common thing for purchasers cannot afford to pay to fulfill their payment obligations at the due dates, and then that will be regarded as default. After default, then the vendor would be able to opt for terminating, giving notice to terminate the sale, and then to put the property into the resale market and then sell it. Okay, and then the shortfall will actually be recoverable against the defaulting purchaser. Okay, so perhaps you have also read from the news that actually for some developments, there were a chain of default being triggered by the first default, and other purchasers who actually know that, okay, now the mortgageability of this property will be at stake. And at the end of the day, that would also trigger a domino effect, to the effect that actually one default of one purchaser actually the chain effect or domino effect towards others. Okay, so one can see that actually from the statistics that it is not an isolated incident, but one default has been triggered, it will lead to multiple defaults. And in some extreme examples, actually, for resales, even for resales, there will also be defaults. So we often see from the news that there's this lead path. Okay, default for one and default for the second resale, for the third resale, etc., etc. Okay, so from that point of view, this would be a fashionable phenomenon. Okay, so the other tables also sets forth the forfeiture statistics. Okay, and mostly you can see that from the table beneath that the Gong Ga photo, which actually records the difference between the first sale and also the resale, and that would usually exceed 10%. So that prima facie gives rise to the rights of the vendor to chase for the price difference and also other expenses that is incurred in the sale. And so that is actually pretty scary, because for purchasers in the past, they usually conceive that actually there would be a clean break after they have let go of the sale, but actually that was not the case. And so as I said, this came as a surprise, and purchasers normally would think that, okay, I have paid my deposit, it was already a big sufferance on my part to have the deposit deposited. But we all understand that deposits, adding up the initial and also the further deposit, would usually be 10%, or even more. Okay, so the forfeiture of it already means millions. Okay, but after all, the margin of the market fall has exceeded this margin, or so much so that actually the developer feared to chase for the shortfall. Okay, and one factor that has contributed perhaps to this preconception about having a clean break, okay, and I have the deposit to be cut, then it will be all right. What's wrong is perhaps due to this the imposition of a break clause that has been commonly adopted or incorporated in preliminary sale and purchase agreements. So for normal preliminary sale and purchase agreements, we often see that, okay, there is this 5% deposit that the purchaser may elect to forego, just in case he does not elect to complete. So for pro forma preliminary sale and purchase agreements, there is this escape clause that, okay, after all, if I do not wish to complete, then what will be at stake will only be confined to this 5%. Okay, so perhaps that has given rise to the perception of many people that, okay, now why shouldn't the practice follow after signing the form of agreement? Okay, but of course, we go further, we look into the mirror clause, actually, that this is actually not the case. And so these are the media coverages that I just referred to. And one of the more informative ones will be the interview of Mr. Alan Yip, who is the partner of House Williams. Okay, so that discussion actually is more legalistic. Okay, and a lot of my content actually was inspired by him. But of course, I also have some other observations as well. Okay, so I start off with default by purchaser, and it's not just for convey for per hand resale contract. Actually, it applies to each and every sale in the market. And we know and understand that for general conveyancing practice, the balance usually about 90% purchase price will be paid at completion. Okay, but for pre-sale, it is a little bit different because it really depends on what payment plan that particular purchaser subscribed to. And for pre-sales, actually, in the old days where the interest rate was low, then purchasers opt for this plan if available or take full. Okay, which means that actually, if the pre-sale period is very long, say for example 3 or 4 years, okay, and the purchaser can actually choose to pay the full balance purchase price on say 90, 100, 120 days. So upon that deadline, then the full purchase price is paid. And if he or she would like to have some finance, then he would have to seek to enter into some equitable mortgage, okay, what we call EM, for that purpose. All right, so for Zhigong, actually, that attracts more discounts because the developer will actually receive some finance in advance. Okay, but the downside is that if upon the payment dates, the purchaser cannot really afford to pay for the balance of the purchase price, he or she would not be able to obtain this finance through EM, equitable mortgage, then he or she would be in default. Okay, now that should be contrasted with stage payment plans, where usually it will be after the material date of a pre-sale plan that the purchaser fulfill his payment obligations. Okay, so for stage payment plan, usually you pay off some tranches or first in first 90 or 120 days. And then it will be after the issuance of the OP or the CC that the purchaser will be expected to pay the remainder purchase price. So after completion, it's usually after completion of the development, then the developer will be in a position to assign the property in favor of the purchaser. Then the payment obligation price. All right, so I deal with deposits first because deposits, I believe many people know it already. It shouldn't be too controversial that deposit being paid in favor of the vendor that would be forfeitable upon breach. Okay, so in Chinese it's called ban or ban. Okay, and also I think the landmark case everybody would know that is the case of the DFA case of police, and that we comprehensively discussed the consequence and the nature of deposits. So I have divided into two kinds of deposit. One being deposit implicita, which is of course under the contract is being drafted and regarded as deposit. So for deposit implicita, the CFA has actually branded it as an earnest performance. Chinese is called jump. Whereas usually if the purchaser default, then this deposit is meant to be forfeitable by the vendor. Okay, and of course, if insofar as if the party has stipulated that okay, the amount of deposit as being paid to the vendor exceeds 10%, then of course that would be subject to the court scrutiny. Okay, and the test will be on whether or not it will be reasonable in those so-called exceptional circumstances to justify a larger deposit. Now, of course, this may have some connection with the notion of losses to be suffered by a developer. because a developer may actually suffer more losses in there, etc., etc. But actually, for deposit implicit, the notion of losses or estimation of losses may not be that relevant, because if after all, the court will be looking at during the time of contract as to whether or not there are indeed circumstances to justify more than 10%. Okay, so it's called reasonableness rather than the traditional test of penalty, to whether or not, okay, those liquidated damages would be excessive in nature. Okay, so usually there may not be any inquiry on the potential losses that may be suffered by the vendor, so to speak. Okay, because the inherent nature of forced is rather different. Okay, so the court has also held that actually after forfeiting the deposit, if there is common law damages to be recoverable against the purchaser, then the amount of the deposit should be given credit. Okay, so suppose you have forfeited 10% and the market fall is 20%, then prima facie, the purchaser would be liable to compensate that shortfall 10%. Okay, so you have to give credit for forfeited deposit. Okay, but in one of my instructions, one of my cases, I think I was instructed to argue that one should not give deposit. Okay, so that particular vendor was quite aggressive. Okay, now one can also refer to this DA case called Orient Bright, because Orient Bright is a case which was quite exceptional. In that case, the deposit, being a rental deposit, was drafted in the sense that, okay, it should be forfeitable absolutely. Then, according to that drafting, the landlord was not obliged to give credit. Okay, and I think the Court of Appeal has upheld that. Okay, but that, of course, needs to be confined to the landlord and tenant context and may not be that relevant to conveyancing transactions. Okay. Now, I think over these few years, there are a number of cases who try to discuss, or the court to discuss, as to whether or not deposits exceeding 10% and justifiable. And I think the leading case first will be on Channel Green. And Channel Green involves a longer completion period of 4.5 months. So on those circumstances, I think the court has actually upheld the deposit being forfeitable. A larger deposit being forfeitable by the vendor. Okay, but a more recent case on the sale of a cold storage building. So the purchaser actually purchased the whole building, but actually at the end of the day, she defaulted. So in that case, 20% deposit was paid. One of the issues was that whether this deposit was regarded as reasonable. And in this case, of course, the vendor has relied on a number of factors, saying that, okay, this is an en bloc sale, not just one floor, not just one unit. The risks are particularly high. There's a long completion period, etc., etc. But I don't think the court, Justice Peter, was ruling in favor of vendor. Okay, so it was held that the 20% deposit was not justified. Okay, and the aftermath is that if it is to be held unreasonable, that deposit would have to be returned in full. Okay, there is no fallback, there's no halfway house where the court could read down and use this blue pencil test to say that, okay, if 20% is unreasonable, then we fall back to 10%. Okay, so it's all or nothing. Okay, so that's the case of simply power. Now, in contrast, if deposits are being drafted in a way that, okay, there should be forfeited as liquidated damages, then of course we know the famous in Dunlop pneumatic tires, and that has been updated to the case of Cavendish, where the court would have to take note of the proportionality test of the primary and secondary obligations. Okay, so I don't think, again, this is controversial, but now the court would actually look as to, okay, whether or not that would actually be disproportionate to actually penalize. Okay, liquidated damages usually means that it will mean a cap on liability. So if the amount of deposit is 10%, then even if the actual loss that has been suffered by the vendor exceeds 10%, then the vendor would actually have to stick with 10% only. Okay, but never say never, because in some contracts, if not in more usual contracts, conveyancers will actually insert this clause without prejudice to the right of vendor to recover any damages or any loss or damage suffered. Okay, so any actual loss that has been suffered in addition to the deposit, with the force of this clause actually can be recoverable. Okay? So I think the main dish today will be on this mirror clause, because under this clause, actually, it will provide for the fact that the deposit will be forfeitable. Okay, and any deficiency arising from the resale and all expenses attending the same will be made good, paid by the defendants, liquidate them. Okay, so we'll go into this clause more deeply. All right, now before we go into the remuneration clause, I also included these escape clauses that I've just mentioned in preliminary sale and purchase agreement. So in prelims, there are usually these clauses as drafted or actually printed by estate agency firms to say that, okay, if there is the breach or default by the purchaser, or the purchaser is indicated that he will not be able to complete without signing the formal agreement, and of course, this 5% or 3% can forfeit the vendor, then the vendor can resell, but there would not be any further liability or damages. Okay, and also there cannot be a specific performance. Okay, so that way, that might have given this perception to the purchasers or estate agents out there actually is more again. You can actually forego that deposit, and then nothing would happen. No adverse consequence happen because of the effect of the clause. But actually, the picture would change a lot after signing the form. Okay, so that is the usual escape clause that we see in prelims. All right, now to complete the picture, I also cite this escape clause by the vendor. So if the vendor is in breach, so the vendor is not in position to actually complete without signing the formal, then of course there is this option for the vendor to immediately compensate the purchaser the refund of the deposit together with a sum equivalent to the amount of the initial deposit. So this is another typical that okay, so you return the deposits immediately together with an equivalent amount. So again, that gets the vendor out of trouble, because that would also serve as a liability cap for the vendor. Okay, and in the case of Manzan Finance and also subsequent cases, it was held that upon non-completion by the vendor have to immediately compensate. Okay, so they have to render this repayment and also compensation immediately on completion date and not later. Otherwise, the vendor would still be exposed to further liability. Okay, and I think this case, the position was followed in the case in subsequent cases, including LIS and also the Court of Appeal in Uniform International. Okay, so this is of course applicable to when the vendor is the culpable party. So if the vendor breaches, then the vendor will be placed under this rather harsh or difficult position that he has to repay the deposits immediately. Otherwise, we cannot invoke this clause. Okay, so but whereas if the vendor is the innocent party, as per what we will discuss later, I don't think this is the logic as applied by these cases is applicable to vendors. Since being the innocent party is often being well established that he or she will be entitled to wait and see. Okay, so that is one of the positions. All right, so generally, without any limitation, then the common law position that a party who is an innocent party, he will actually be able to recover common law damages against the breaching party. Okay, so according to the principles under heading investment, any loss that has flowed from the breach that can be recoverable, but of course it will be subject to remoteness, forfeiture, and mitigation. So it's always open to the purchaser to say that, all right, you have not mitigated, you have resold the property or too low, you haven't properly marketed the property, etc., etc. Okay, and also there's this market for already 2 years, and you still haven't sold it. Okay, so there can be this notice inconvenience that will break the chain of causation law. Okay, so all these arguments can be raised on the part of the purchaser, and perhaps that is why people acting for vendor try to get around these difficulties by incorporating the Umira clause that we'll see later. Okay, so the general position again for innocent party, especially the vendor, is that they can elect to terminate, i.e., give notice, even without the Umira clause and common law. The innocent party can actually accept repudiation right away and sue for to sue for damages. Okay, so that's one way. The second way is that to affirm the contract and to insist upon performance. Okay, I don't care about whether or not you would complete or not, but the later stage when you are able to complete, then I force you to complete. Then let's wait. Okay, so that's affirming the contract. Okay, but making that choice, actually, when that choice should be made is actually the main dish of the day. Okay, should this election be made right away or at reasonable time? Okay, and overall, after overviewing all these cases that I'm going to cite, the answer is that actually for an innocent party, he or she can be entitled to elect for some time. Okay? There's no time limit for an innocent party to really be put to any duty to make his choice right away or 1 year later or 2 years later. Okay, so according to the case of Crocs and Crook, it was held that he is not bound to elect within reasonable or any other time. Okay, so that is the case being adjudicated around 40 years ago. And later, the case of Diamond Jubilee, Mr. Justice Jeffrey Ma in the CA level actually had this to say: in the absence of any contractual provisions, the general is that there's no duty on an innocent party to accept repudiatory breach either within reasonable time or at all. No question of reasonable time for mitigation arises. Okay, and in Johnson and Agnew, where sale of land, innocent party can even wait until trial before making an election. All right, so the words are being couched in rather strict terms, which is from Mr. Justice Ma at CA level, defined it lower court. So one can gather that actually this creates some leeway for the vendor to really say that, okay, I can hold on to the election point for indefinite period of time because there's no reasonable duty for me to make the choice. Okay, so and that actually is being built in to the Umira clause, as you will see in a minute. That Umira clause actually would actually require the vendor to give notice to terminate on breach. There's no time limitation. And when by analogy, using this kind of ruling and that being applicable, Umira clause, one would see the difficulty on the part of purchaser to say that, okay, there's no duty to mitigate, no reason for, etc. So the vendor can actually hold on indefinitely. Okay, and after 10 years later, they sue me for the losses that they have sustained. Okay, so that is the main difficulty that I think the media has discussed over the past few months. Okay, now of course I have carried out some further research on this duty to elect, and there are a number of relevant cases, including this shipping case called the nausea. And then this paragraph says that if he does nothing for too long, there may come a time where the law will treat him as having affirmed. If he maintains the contract for the moment while reserving his right to treat as repudiated, then he has not yet elected. So facing this kind of ruling, developers can actually be easy to actually issue a letter, say that, okay, I reserve my right, I haven't elected. Okay, to get around this kind of ruling that, okay, if the developer maintains his position for so long that he might have been affirmed. But even if the developer has affirmed actually the purchaser is in continuing breach. So later on, he actually can terminate again. So that actually would be the difficulty. Now, I think one of the more important cases that have been cited in the past would be this Zhang Zhengping case. So Mr. Justice Rogers says that actually, according to the common law, it supports the position that the innocent party may delay accepting a repudiation. So actually, this again gives rise to a rather confident carte blanche for the vendor not to accept repudiation right away, and then to wait and see how the market goes. Okay, and whenever they find a replacement buyer, they will accept the repudiation and then enter into sale. So that is the usual technique that's being adopted by vendors in Hong Kong, which is consistent with this ruling. And I think the more or less the same sentiment has been expressed in the case of European Asia, where in this case, again, the court has expressed this ruling again. Innocent party may delay, and even cited a CFA case to say that, okay, acceptance of repudiation took place sometime 2 years after repudiation. Okay, so 2 years can be a benchmark where the market fallen up significantly, so that the purchaser bear all these losses for the market drop. Okay, whether or not you view that ruling is fair is of course the opinion, but that here is what it is, European Asia. Okay, now I come to the main clause that has been seen, which has been incorporated as the Rumira clause. Okay, so this is the clause that we are, or most people are talking about, since this is the form that has been adopted by the Lands Department, and that has also been commonly adopted by many practitioners. Okay, so a vendor may, by further notice in writing, forthwith determine this agreement. So it is the right, not the duty, because they use the word may. Okay, upon the purchaser's notice in writing to not to complete. All right, and after that, then of course, after determination, the vendor can forfeit, the vendor can resell. Any deficiency in price shall be made good, and all the expenses attending such resale shall be borne by the purchaser. Such deficiency and expenses shall be recoverable by the vendor and as for liquidated damages. Okay, and provided that the resale is done within 6 months. Okay, so there are different components under this Rumira clause. We'll look into that. But firstly, I think this is the earliest case that we have found this clause to be applicable. Seen in court cases is the case of Rumira and Providence Center. Providence Center is Luofu Zhongshan in North Point, whereas I think this case involves the sale or pre-sale of more than 200 units under 200 cent purchase agreement. Okay, so the crazy good old days where we can have the bulk sales. Okay, and I think this clause, as seen from the case, was prescribed by the Law Society to regulate over the pre-sale behavior. And perhaps that is also being imposed under the consent scheme. Okay, so under the consent scheme, even for now, for pro forma clauses as imposed by the Lands Department, one can see from the website that actually they include the very same clause. Okay, under clause 17. So as I said, it is widely incorporated in pre-sales, in non-consent scheme, or even in ordinary conveyancing contracts. Okay, now in Cap 621 for PS and Ps, okay, it's 5%. But for formal S&Ps, there's no such mandatory requirements to have a Rumira clause to be incorporated. But still, as a matter of practice, people just incorporate it as a matter of boilerplate. Okay, so the key ruling under Rumira is that actually this is not a comprehensive remedy. Okay, so if the vendor actually resells, gave termination notice and resells outside the 6-month period, of course that would not be compliant with the requirements that, okay, the property has been resold in 6 months. But actually, the court construed that this clause is not actually does not oust common law remedy. So in theory, the vendor can still recover the loss and damage against the purchaser if he or she will be able to show forfeiture, mitigation, mootness. Okay, so in that event, of course, common law damages still be available. Okay, but if the resale takes place within the 6 months, then of course this clause will fight. Okay. Now, why this clause will fight is because the significance of this clause would actually be that on the liquidated damages way of drafting. Okay, so it would mean actually that even if, all right, so for the vendor to resell after giving notice, and resale takes place within 3 months, and the price of the resale actually can be 50% off the initial purchase price, then of course the purchaser will be stuck with this shortfall. Okay, because it is called liquidated damages. And under this clause, there has not been any quantification to limit the amount of liquidated damages to be in the amount of 10%, 20%. No, it is a blank check being given on the part of the purchaser to compensate the shortfall, like a deed of guarantee. Okay, so actually, now that's actually stirred up a lot of discussion as to whether or not this clause is actually reasonable, because actually it gives very wide power to sell for the vendor to actually sell the property at whatever price that he deems fit. Okay, it's not just about the shortfall, but also the expenses that have been incurred. So for the agency cost, marketing cost, the conveyancing cost, the purchaser also have to be liable for what is expenses. Okay, and in some extreme cases, agency costs for reselling can exceed millions. Okay, of course, one can see that actually for this clause, originally people would think that, okay, the vendor wouldn't abuse this clause that way, because there is some commercial incentive for the vendor to actually resell his or her flat at on a price which is as high as possible. Okay, so normally resell, it wouldn't be a sale which is $10. Okay, so that actually may give rise to some comfort on the part of the purchaser. Okay, but actually never say never, because if the purchaser, if the vendor sees that the purchaser actually is a wealthy man, okay, he would actually rather to chase people with deeper pockets. Okay, so that's my observation. But I think the cold comfort can come from the same case, that is from Diamond Jubilee, okay, where Mr. Justice Ma also held that actually there is actually some duty to act reasonably. So actually the resale cannot be sold at $1, and then the shortfall will be the original price minus $1. Okay, so there is some loose duty at the time of resale to actually conduct the resale in reasonable manner, okay, in good faith, arm's length, okay, by implication. Okay, so again, that gives rise to some cold comfort. But one would have to note and be cautious that this ruling only applies to the duty of resale. So after giving of the notice of termination, this duty, the duty of some loose reason would arise, but not before. Okay, because before, whether or not one would have to give due termination, again, I think the position was already set out in the previous cases, that actually a vendor is under no reasonable duty to give notice. So whatever delays, the purchaser will be stuck with it. Okay, so that is one of the effect of liquidated damages, because that actually precludes effectively the purchaser from arguing on grounds of remoteness, causation, mitigation. So whatever the resale price that is, you have to pay for the shortfall. That is effectively essence and the spirit this clause. Okay, so it actually operates against purchasing. Okay, now of course that is understandable from the vendor's point of view, because actually resale, again, as I say, there is this assumption that if you manage to resell within 6 months, then more or less the market conditions may still resemble that of the time of contract. So one could actually justify the reasonableness of this clause to say that, okay, if resale is taking place within 6 months, then usually it won't deviate too much. Okay, even if there is a market fall, then there will be limits. Okay, so that might some justification is to how this clause operates. But I think the loophole is really on the giving of the notice of termination. Okay, so that is the Woomera clause, and Woomera, this clause actually has been upheld by a number of cases already, including the Montreal, and also Olibet, okay, which are quite recently adjudicated. Okay, but I still haven't seen a case where it is put to test as to whether or not the vendor would be under a duty to give reasonable notice in a short period of time. Since after all, what the person already defaulted, okay, and he already indicated that he is not able to please, then what is the point of holding on to the contract? Okay, so this point can be, of course, ventilated, of course, to be seen in one of the potential arguments on the part of purchase. Now, I give that these cases a little bit because I think you can always read through the ruling. So the more important bits in this takeaway point for today's seminar is really on the practical implications. Okay, so vendor would very likely rely on the notion that under this clause there is no time limit. Okay, and slide 40 for the rest. And then he or she would be entitled to keep all options open to look for purchases. Okay, and then I would keep alive the fish, and then say that, okay, as long as I don't give duty to terminate, I'm still at liberty to actually affirm or terminate. Okay, and after all, the deposit has been paid and it's held, so it's already won by the vendors to have this confidence that they will have deposits. It's just a matter of how much that I can recover against the defaulting purchaser. Okay. There can also be some saying that, okay, if I repossess and let it out for some time, and then until the market recovers, say 10 years later, then can this clause still be invoked? Okay, a big question mark. Now, but of course, the vendor is not without risk because in the falling markets, we see that prices drop. Ultimately, the vendor would also have to bear the risk. If he holds on for too long, then the purchaser also may not be able to compensate because, after all, it is the purchaser without means to complete. So, what's really the point to pursue against a purchaser who can't really afford to pay anyway? Okay, chances are that you get an empty judgment. So that's always the consideration of the vendor. Okay, and also that because people will have to incur construction costs and also the land fine. So naturally, a vendor would have to resell as soon as possible because there are interest expenses, there are holding costs, finance costs, etc., etc. Okay, and also holding on to the contract for too long may actually, as some of the cases suggest, that actually, if the vendor becomes in breach, say for example, he or she delays the completion of the project, then he will become the party in breach, and in that case, all the so-called remedies gone. Okay, and also the picture will be complicated by project sales because for project sales, for pre-sales, the position isn't really that simple. The impact of a forfeiture and also resale can spill over to other units in the project. So it's not as simple as that, okay, I have this 10 million flat now, the purchaser has defaulted, then I can just go sell straight away. Okay? Because after all, if you register a notice of, the notice of termination into the register of transaction as mandated under Cap 621, then everybody in the market will know, including all those purchases that have actually entered contract with you. Okay, they will say that, okay, this purchaser has defaulted. It really means that actually the market has fallen. Okay, banks would also have noticed about this of this part there. Okay, and then they may actually value down the property in any case because of this sale. And especially if the resale is to be registered in the notice, sorry, in the register of transaction, then it would become the updated market price. Right? So that would have a very strong impact to the remaining sales, whether or not the vendor has already entered with purchases, and also for remaining units which has not been sold. Okay, so the impact is not as easy as one may think because there can be a lot of commercial implications. Okay, so the very proper way to do it is, of course, now I give notice to terminate, and then I put the market, put the unit to market for sale. Okay, but actually, it's not as simple as that. So in practice, what I've heard is that actually, upon the default of the purchaser, upon the due date, actually they would have to withhold the issuance of the notice of termination. But on the other hand, at the same time, they will find an estate agent to say that, okay, try to market this property to some buyers that may be interested. Okay, and in this way, then of course they can market the property without formally giving notice of termination. And as long as if the market, sorry, if the buyer is attracted and then he commits to this so-called notice memorandum, then of course, then it is upon such time, then the vendor will elect to terminate the sale, and then to have the resale contracts to be registered right. Okay, but of course, this kind of operation, I would say, it is a gray area, because whether or not you can actually have the property which has having a live contract, which is not yet terminated, and you can market it to general purchasers in the public, may actually have compliance concerns under Cap 621, because under Cap 621 there is this requirement that actually all the units that is available for sale should be included in the price list, should be included in the sales arrangement, etc. So this way of operation, conduct the resale, is actually a big question mark. Okay, and also coupled with difficulty in finding a substitute purchaser. All right, so with all these difficulties in mind, actually, it wouldn't be too hard in the context of litigation for the vendor to actually dress up his or her defenses and to contend that actually this cost is reasonable. Under the circumstances, it was reasonable for me to actually withhold the giving of notice until I obtain, I can get a replacement buyer. Okay, so all these can be window dressed to justify this delayed election. All right. Now, is that really hopeless on the part of the defaulting purchaser? All right. It suffices to say, on my part, I would say, in light of the strength of what the authorities and also the underlying rationale and also the facts that the vendor may actually put up, it would be a very difficult and uphill battle for the purchaser. Okay, and one can of course say that, okay, this clause isn't really meant to be abused by the vendor that way, because there are purposive constructions that you can try to convince the court that actually it is to facilitate resale, but not to withhold the giving of the notice for such a long period of time. Okay, and with that in mind, I'm very grateful for one of my juniors in my chambers, which I have sought assistance from, to think of some ways to actually help the defaulting purchasers get out of trouble. Okay, but of course, these arguments are really potential arguments only. Okay, and firstly, the matter of contractual interpretation, we try to say that even if there's this right on the part of the vendor, it should be exercised reasonably, okay, by way of implied term or corporate construction. Okay, otherwise it will be defeating the contractual intention of this 6-month period. Okay, and furthermore, actually, even for so far as for contractual rights is concerned, it will be subject to this Bergenza duty. Okay, you can't exercise these clauses on bad faith. Okay, and another argument we try to say that actually after the purchaser has defaulted, there's really no legitimate reason or interest on the part of the vendor to hold on this contract because the purchaser is already having no means to complete already. So what would be the real reason to still stay on this contract? Okay, so one can of course borrow from these authorities, MSC in Mediterranean. Okay, so to say that okay, according to White and Carter principles, the purchaser, sorry, the vendor has to elect, and then the duty to mitigate would have to arrive as at the date of the anticipatory breach or the breach of the purchase. Okay, and the remaining arguments are on quantum. Okay, so it's very common for the vendor to actually sue for interest losses. Okay, but for interest losses, would that fall under the notion of shortfall or expenses attending such sale? Okay, prima facie, I would say that interest, as far as interest is concerned, it should be governed under the High Court ordinance, okay, to avoid prejudgment interest. Okay, but of course, it really depends on the way of drafting. If the way of drafting is one like the case of broad money, then of course this expense and also the interest losses that has suffered can also be recovered against the defaulting person. Okay, so I think these are more or less the potential arguments that one can try to salvage the situation on the part of purchaser. But I still remain my personal opinion that is the battle will be uphill and it shouldn't be difficult. Okay, so this is the case of broad money that I just mentioned. All right, so conclusions, there will be impact, strong impact to first-hand sales that may deter buyers, and some actually the aftermath is that there is some developer would promise that they won't recover shortfalls, but how enforceable this promise remains to be. Okay, but nowadays, given the abolishment of SSD and BSD, people use limited company. So I don't think the impact will be as great as imagined for 2024 onwards, because people use 40 copies. Okay, will the Woomera clause be reformed? Not likely, because this clause has been there for years. You all know the bargaining power. Okay, so Woomera clause likely to stay, but and if that is the case, then of course purchasers have to be more cautious in making the decision. Okay, so that would be the end of my presentation.
Oh, if not, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.